Um, I wasn't expecting to come online back to your program so soon though, but circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, I might have to air our takes that we cut out. Remember, because we ended and then we talked for like 12 minutes about our views on the market, and those turned out to be quite prophetic.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that those were not included in the final program.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to release that as an outtake. Um, so let's get started straight away. This one I might air quickly since it is such a timely subject.
Hmm.
So this is the Brandon Adams podcast, episode 10 or 11, depending on how quickly I get it out. I did one yesterday with Barton Wang. He has, when we spoke last, which was around 6 weeks ago, it was purely financial markets. In fact, I got the criticism that we went a little bit deep in the weeds, which was inevitable given what was going on at the time. And I've been following you on Twitter for a long time. I noted in our first episode that you've been absolutely amazing at calling tactical market moves on the basis of very detailed analysis of liquidity conditions in the market. Then 6, 8 weeks ago, your Twitter complexion changed, where you started tweeting almost exclusively about the coronavirus. A lot of the audience, I think, is going to be familiar with your work because I've been promoting it. A lot of this audience is going to be familiar with your work, but explain the personal circumstances that led you to focus on coronavirus.
Yeah, first, Brendan, thank you for having me back on the program so quickly. As you were saying earlier, that I kind of switched my Twitter feed topic completely from Fed liquidity content to the coronavirus back in, I think, mid-January. And it's actually pretty close to the time when we taped the previous podcast. At that time, I was experiencing pretty much a personal crisis because I have very close family members who live 230 miles away from Wuhan, basically in the neighboring province. And, people in their 70s, a pretty high risk group for having bad outcomes from that disease. And also at the same time, so my family has a little bit of a genetic condition that changed their immunology a little bit different from other people. So we have some kind of a very mild so-called mast cell activation syndrome. Some people may be familiar with it. Basically what it is like your body can release cytokine, which is a messenger molecule similar to what the coronavirus can trigger your body to release. For coronavirus, it's really in your lungs, but this is like things can just get triggered by, for example, playing tennis for over 2 hours. Like that's something would do it for me. And it causes a wide range of symptoms for relatively mild. It's not as big as coronavirus. It's mostly like a brain fog that cannot be solved with coffee, for example, or fatigue, malaise, those kind of symptoms. And so I've been studying a lot of remedies or nutritional methods to deal with this problem. And when coronavirus outbreak started to happen in China, that immediately just triggered me very quickly because I know several of my family members are kind of high risk to the coronavirus, and none of them actually listened to me initially. This was a conversation we had back around our New Year conversation. When the first reports in Wuhan started to surface online saying there's some kind of SARS-like virus going on in Wuhan, caught up everybody, close family members in China, not only the city I just mentioned, but also the families in Shanghai. Nobody cared. And so I sort of stayed quiet for a while, but in mid-January, this is really started to explode. You start to see doctors being infected, not just the doctor in the ER department, but also doctors in the neurology department, doctors, dermatologists, OBGYN, pretty much like once it spreads out to the entire hospital. And so I started to become very, very worried about my family members in China because I know they'll be very prone to this infection and the outcome will not be very good. But also at that point, there was really very little we know about the treatment plans at the time. So the survival rate at the time I estimated for them is about 50% in 3 months. Plus all the travel restrictions I foresee it at the time. I realized like if they passed away, I wouldn't be able actually to go there and then, you know, say goodbye, or it's just going to be a huge mess. So it came to me as a very personal experience. So I pretty much stopped trading in mid-January after our previous podcast taping, and then sort of focused my entire attention onto possible solutions of therapeutical solutions to the coronavirus. So along the way, you know, I've been working in academia for a long time, published about 70 papers. I do academic research really well and for a long time. And so reading these latest clinical papers and connecting dots, looking at the virologies, the immune response from different people, how do you deal with it from a nutritional perspective, a pharmaceutical perspective. Those are just kind of what I've been doing for a long time. I've been studying genetics and immunology for almost 10 years in this area. So I kind of switched from talking about stocks to talking about coronavirus, because like you have to survive this in order to benefit for any profit you make in the market. Like if we can't survive this, it's going to be really bad. Also later in February, I have a couple of friends in Beijing who actually work in the fever clinic of the top 4 hospitals in Beijing, and we had a lot of discussion about the clinical features. I helped them a little bit to analyze some of the data, some of the symptoms and possible reasons for those. So it's been a lot of information coming in, and I kind of wanted to help people to figure out a way to not to panic, and then just to understand what's coming and then deal with it in a rational way.
So I'm going to ask you some simple questions, because I do think at this point there's so much information out there. Most people are still at the level of elementary questions. We coordinated this interview last minute. I wrote you yesterday. My impetus for writing you was twofold. You'd be quite disappointed in me to know that I was considering taking a flight tomorrow. I made the decision today not to take that flight.
Smart one.
Yeah. But I was planning to fly to California tomorrow. I canceled everything today. I'm not going. So that was impetus one, that I was still thinking about it when I messaged you. But much more importantly, I chatted with my closest friend who runs the big biotechnology hedge fund, and he's chatting with the infectious disease doctors, and the conversation I had with him was quite concerning. It was, to summarize, the part that had me really terrified was that his estimates of the probability of dying, given that you contracted as a healthy individual, were much higher than I thought, based on the data that I had seen.
Yeah.
And then the probability of an ICU visit is also very high. So I was shocked by his estimates, and that's what made me change my mind on the trip and change my mind on other things, and really search out evidence for why his estimates were so different than mine, when in a lot of cases we were looking at similar data.
Right.
So I guess I don't want
So
to get into that
what's your
straight away.
estimate to start with? What's your estimate to start with? Like, because I guess a lot of people probably have a similar estimate.
I guess I don't think of myself as overconfident with regard to health outcomes. Everyone knows about the overconfidence literature. People systematically think that they're above average drivers, that they can make their way without directions, that they have better understandings in a wide variety of contexts than they actually do. However, with health outcomes, I would have thought I was somewhat objective. I think of myself as a healthy person.
Right.
So I would have guessed that my probability of dying conditional on catching it would have been 1 in 5,000, so 1 in 10,000. So very, very low probability of dying. And I would have thought that the probability of an ICU visit would be like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000.
Right.
His estimates were far, far different, far higher.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess among the basic questions I want to ask you, I want to get into that, the probability of dying or going to the ICU. Then somewhat relatedly, there's probabilities for above 60-year-olds.
Right.
And then you've tweeted a good bit about likely number of cases given what evidence we do have in the U.S. And you've also tweeted a good bit about protective measures that one could take. I don't really understand new viruses. So in LA, they just had some new cases, and their protocol is if they think that you've been within 6 feet of an infected person, they would like you to quarantine yourself.
Right.
Now, do you have an estimate for, let's just take an everyday context. Let's just say that you're seated next to someone at a basketball game who has the coronavirus, and your immune system is healthy at the time. What would you suppose the probability is that you contract the coronavirus?
70-80%, I would say, if you're sitting next to somebody who have it and who had it for a couple of days, that the virus has already replicated, and then probably pre-symptom. If the guy has a fever, he probably wouldn't go to the basketball game, right? But pre-symptom or subclinical symptom stage, people are still pretty contagious.
So it's a function of viral load, and the viral load starts low and is very high at the point where you have symptoms, and it just depends where you meet them along their journey from no symptoms to symptoms.
Right, and how long have you been sitting next to this person for that basketball game, right? So quite a few anecdotal cases of people contracted coronavirus in my friend circle, like my friend's dad and a couple of other friends. Those people pretty much had like 2 hours of exposure just transferring trains or flights in Wuhan, railway station, and airport.
Got it. Now, here's where the questions will get a little bit naive because I don't understand the science very well. So if a new flu season comes around and there's a different strain of flu going around,
right?
Let's just say when H1N1 was going around, just a strain of flu,
right?
It's somewhat similar to other flus in previous seasons, and so your body has some level of immunity, and therefore the chance that you beat it, given that you're exposed to it, is somewhat high. Is that reasonable to say? Whereas this one, because your body, because it's different and your body hasn't been exposed to it, the chance that you beat it is low.
Right. Nobody has the antibody, so it will spread to everybody. It's very hard to stop it at because like if 10% of people have immunity, then those people will not. They will terminate the transmission chain, right? But if nobody has immunity, then the transmission chain will just continue unimpeded.
And it so coronaviruses are they classified as a type of flu, or are they something totally different?
It's a type of cold. It's a
type of cold?
subtype.
Okay.
Yeah, there are other coronaviruses, not this. They call it SARS coronavirus 2 now. Let's just call it COVID-19 because it's easier to say and that's confusing compared to SARS. So COVID-19 is just one subtype of a wide range of different kind of coronaviruses. And there are other existing coronaviruses that have infected many people. That just cause common cold. It doesn't cause pneumonia for the most part, and they don't cause a lot of death because most people already have the antibody for them. And also those viruses are not as virulent as this COVID-19. So back to your original question, for people of our age group, let's say people in their 40s, I think right now the fatality rate for an infection is about 0.4% from the data, from the latest data. And mostly that's from China at this point. And so that's 1 in every 250 people, right? And the chances of going to ICU is twice of that. So it's going to be 0.8% because the outcome of ICU patients right now is really bad. Like only 50% people can survive that. Once you get into ICU, you really need very good care. You need to have doctors who know what they're doing. Initially in Wuhan, the survival rate in ICU was extremely low. It's just painful to watch that process. Very few people can survive because they weren't treating it correctly. So, but my view right now is a lot of these are completely preventable. Like people in their 40s and shouldn't need to die because a lot of these are just because people don't understand or don't recognize the danger of this virus. The kind of symptom sometimes appears to be mild unless you do have blood testing and you know what's going on. For example, the leading cause, I think probably 25 to 30% of death for people below 50 is not actually respiratory failure. It's from myocarditis. That's an inflammation of heart muscle and causes heart not being able to beat properly if the patient is exerting themselves. For example, running or make a dash to catch a train. When your heart rate goes above a certain level and you have big inflammation in your heart muscles, that could just cause sudden heart attack, and then it's often fatal. And that's why you saw those videos from Iran, from China in the initial days in Wuhan. You saw these people collapsing on the street. Those are not because they couldn't breathe. Those are because they had sudden heart attack. For older people, some of them had people above 65, some of them have sudden strokes because coronavirus also mess up people's clotting mechanism. But for younger people, it's like one of the keys is you really need to rest. Every single survivor case I read from Wuhan, from Beijing, they just sleep for 2 or 3 weeks. Sleep and eat. Keep your nutrition well balanced. Take a lot of protein. Make sure you have a lot of enough amino acid intake for your body to make antibodies, basically. And those people survived. But there's people who are not careful because COVID-19 is weird. It has this 2 different phases. The first phase is in the first week, right? You start to have a cough, you start to have fever. The fever is not particularly high. Some people have high fever, but not everybody. A lot of people, I would say more than 50% only have a low-grade fever, less than 100 degrees for many people. And then these fever will go away in a week. So if we take the experience from the flu, you would think, okay, the fever is gone, then I'm fine, I'm recovering. But COVID-19 is different. When your fever is gone, depending on your genetic makeup, depending on your body's reaction to the virus, Sometimes it's already triggered your immune system to overreact, and then that's what we call a cytokine storm. So basically, there's inflammation in the lung, in the heart. It's left unchecked. Your immune system is going into an overactive state, and the immune system start to attack your own tissue, start to attack the lung tissue, start to attack the heart muscles. And this process itself actually impedes the antibody production because of certain cytokines actually reduce the activity of B cells, which produce the antibody. So then you have the cases where people who don't have fever, but they cannot breathe. That's what you see in a lot of news reports when people have respiratory failure. But also you have people who don't have a fever, but their heart muscles are very inflamed. In China, they do a blood test. There are two biomarkers you can measure in your blood to see how inflamed your heart muscle is. I don't think we will have that much medical resource here in the U.S. if we had a Milan-style outbreak here in the U.S. And then without knowing these information, it's very difficult to handle it if people don't understand the potential dangers of COVID-19. And then you will occasionally see people who are very young, but they just, all of a sudden drop dead on the street because of COVID-19.
So based on what you're saying about transmission, one infected person that was far enough along in terms of viral loading could wreak havoc in any public space, right? Like if they're like one person in one server in a restaurant could infect a huge number of people.
Right, like you see the number coming out of Massachusetts today, right? That's one Biogen conference. 70 people there, like 66 is positive now. That's just one speaker or one attendee went into that conference and mingled with those people for a day, and then pretty much everybody is infected now.
Yeah, that is insane.
And that's how hospital failed in China too. Like it's just a couple of patients in, the entire hospital is paralyzed because doctors from all different kinds of departments started to catch it.
So do you have an estimate of the likely number of cases in the US right now? Is it like 30,000, 40,000?
Right now it's about 20,000 for my estimate for the last weekend. And the doubling rate is pretty worrying. It's between 5 to 7 days, okay? So if we take that and if we have this unimpeded air traffic and road traffic between cities and schools continues and sports event continues, everything just goes on as is, then with this 5 to 7 day doubling rate for the entire country, by mid-June, you will have 10% of the population of the entire United States infected.
Well, talk to me about June, okay? As of a few weeks ago, people were unsure about the slowing of the virus with warmer temperatures, summer-like. What evidence has come out there?
So my current understanding, given the data I've seen, I think going into summer, June, July, August, maybe the speed of spread will be cut down by like 30, 40%, which is not enough at all to stop the spread of this virus. So we're talking about—
You're gathering that evidence from places that are currently hot that have case counts, like Singapore or something?
Singapore, from, mostly from Singapore, from Hong Kong. And if you look at how clusters appears there, you look at Indonesia, when they're not testing, but they're exporting cases to Singapore. They're exporting cases to neighboring countries. Clearly, it's unchecked spread over there.
So with the flu that is disappearing in the summer, you have R0 is the term that you use, right, for the
That's right.
For that one infected person infects. So
right.
In flu, it must be fairly high during the season, like close to 2, and then in the summer it must drop to just above 0, right?
Drop to below 1. And as long as it's below 1, the spread will gradually die off.
And so your estimate for coronavirus is that in the summer it is where?
It's probably going to still be 3 and 4, given what we're doing right now in the U.S. people not wearing masks, people not be careful with going to dinner parties. People still pretty much live their life as before.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough to change your behavior. I can say on a personal level, I find it difficult to make dramatic changes to behavior. We'll get to individual behavior modifications later. I still have some questions about um, the coronavirus itself. So once a person has had it, what evidence do we have in terms of personal immunity? You built up antibodies. Now you're exposed to it again. What is your risk situation?
We don't have a lot of data for that right now, because the earliest patients by now only have like 7 to 8 weeks, right, since their recovery, since early January, and we only have a few people like that in China. Most of the patients only have 2 or 3 weeks, at most 4 weeks of recovery since their discharge from the hospital. So from these people, it looks like the antibody can protect them pretty well. You will read some news reports saying people turning positive back again after a few weeks. My understanding, or my current hypothesis, is that that's mostly has to do with individuals' immune response. So the coronavirus here is a little bit tricky to get rid of when your body develops the antibody, right? So it's not a virus that mostly being carried around by your blood to different parts of your body. It's not like a virus that infects every single organ. It's mostly a respiratory and a digestive tract disease. It infects your lung, it infects your intestine, and that's why some people have diarrhea, pretty big diarrhea, and nausea. And when your body try to get rid of virus in this kind of environment, the antibody in the blood doesn't do anything to your bronchi, to your airway. Those epithelial cells need a different kind of antibody known as IgA. So your body has to produce enough IgA to be secreted onto these mucous membranes, and those IgA will be able to then bind with the virus to neutralize them. It is not a given that everybody will be very, very good at producing IgA. IgA level varies a lot from person to person. Some people just aren't able to produce IgA very efficiently. They can produce a lot of antibody in their blood. They cannot produce those antibody in their lung. And the coronavirus is a little tricky because it kind of causes the lung to have liquid inside because the membrane that separates your blood vessel and to the alveoli is sort of weakened by the coronavirus. So you have liquid buildup in the lung, and those are basically reservoirs for the virus. And to neutralize all this virus, it takes time. It takes a lot of IgA secretion to get that done. If people are malnutrition, they don't have enough antibody production, it may take 2 weeks, 3 weeks for them to completely clear all the virus in their body. So, compounding that with the sensitivity of the current testing method, which is RT-PCR, that has a 30 to 50% false negative rate, it is quite possible when people were discharged from hospital, they just happen to have a false positive. When the viral clearance is not completely finished, and then when they come back later, they show up to be positive again. So I'm not very worried about reinfection at all. I'm mostly worried about the first 2 weeks after symptom, first 3 weeks, let me say, of contracting coronavirus, and then people not being careful with themselves and exert themselves and having unnecessary huge complications to their health.
So I take it there's no chance that you would contract the coronavirus and quietly beat it such that you didn't know you had it, like develop antibodies and beat it so that you didn't even really know you had it.
Kids do like that. Like teenagers, people below like 25, a lot of them have no outward symptom at all. No fever, no coughing. Well, unless they have allergy and some other reasons to cough,
Their
right?
immune system just efficiently defeats it.
Yeah, their antibody generation speed and then capacity is so huge they quickly suppress the virus. So this was known from the very beginning. The second paper ever published about COVID-19, there was a kid, I think it was a 9-year-old boy, from a case in Shenzhen. There was a paper by a group in Hong Kong, and so at the parents' insistence, the doctor did a CT scan of the boy's lung and did see pneumonia. So if on a CT scan, you can see there's pneumonia. You can see the lung has those shadows and patchy shadows in there, and there's clearly infection. And the boy tested positive later on. However, there were just no outward symptom. The boy was having a normal body temperature, no coughing, everything just looks fine. So yeah, so depending on how, and I think, first of all, the underlying reason for this is our immune system, how quickly your T cell matures, how quickly your B cell can produce the antibody, require a lot of different moving parts. And one big part is your thymus, which is a little gland near your chest, right? That thymus is most active for adolescents and for kids. It starts to gradually atrophy and turn into basically a blob of fat when you're getting really, really old. But throughout your 20s, 30s, 40s, it just gradually lose its activity. So it takes longer for your T cell to mature. It takes longer for your antibody to like the antibody response is not as vigorous when you're younger. So there's a large reservoir, I would say, of hard to detect or undetectable kids who are pretty good at spreading this without knowing. It's not their fault. It's just that their body reacts in this way. And then I think it's making this disease extremely hard to control and to contain because the kids have to go to school, right? And they have to exchange viruses with each other if one of them gets sick, and then they bring this back to their home.
Now, the case for optimism at the moment is that in Asia, there are some situations where you have declining case counts in some defined geographies.
That's right.
So what is how was that accomplished? And what is the level of confidence that the transmission has been quieted there?
Well, mostly we're looking at China, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. Taiwan is actually quite amazing. I don't think they have any death cases yet, like Singapore. And they have controlled the outbreak from the very beginning. For all of these countries, pretty much what they did is very early intervention in terms of tracking down, contact tracing all the cases. They tested probably 20 times more people than actual carriers of COVID-19. They locked down their traffic. They protected their doctors. They protected their medical supplies, the protection gears for the doctors and nurses in the ER. They canceled events. They did all these interventions that I think are pretty hard to pull out in US, in Canada, and in Europe at this point.
So in Europe, you had the spread in northern Italy, which really got the market's attention. I actually don't want to chat about markets because your knowledge in this area is so valued, but I will say just briefly that we've had some tremendous failures of market efficiency lately, especially the massive rally post-September. But one of the biggest failures I've ever seen in terms of market rationality was the delayed, late, severe reaction to coronavirus. How it wasn't reacting earlier to this strong exponential with negative effects was very, very strange.
Well, it's actually, I have a very simple explanation for that. If you compare S&P 500 or NASDAQ 100 with Dixie, which is US dollars, right? You can see that ever since January 20th, when the outbreak in China started, they pretty much went hand in hand. What's happening there was initially, because US has been under testing among all the G7 countries. The US case count is extremely low in comparison to Europe and in comparison to Japan throughout February. So US was perceived as a safe haven. Tons of money just flow in from Europe, from Japan, because they thought, okay, their country will be impacted very badly by COVID-19, but somehow US seems to be extremely safe and then nobody will be affected here. So as the case count here was basically put to an artificial low level because of lack of testing and because of the CDC testing criteria being overly strict, money just flow in from Europe, from Japan into US market. So that then you have this rally of both equity and bond in February, during which time actually Fed has not been releasing any liquidity. Treasury was not releasing any liquidity. I was dumbfounded by how far the stock market rally has gone, way above, hundreds of points above what the fair value, if you use the bank reserve levels released by the Federal Reserve, okay? And then Italy happened, Iran happened, and then people started to realize, okay, US probably is not that safe. It's just because they're not testing. And then the market crash goes hand in hand with the dollar crash. Because why? Because the money from Europe and money from Japan, a lot of them are not hedged. When these money flow out of US stock market, they need to be exchanged back into their local currency. And especially when the US market, this equity has been falling 5%, if the US dollar falls another 2%, for them, the loss will be 7%, right? Compounding the two together. So the falling dollar is not only an indication for this money flow, but also it triggered more money to flow out of the US market, and then causing is just accelerating the sell-off. And pretty much the sell-off stops when when dollar stops sliding. So I think that was the dynamics between how the case count of COVID-19 actually drove the stock market in the past 6 or 8 weeks.
Right, and that story you're telling suggests that the expectation structure maybe is not so sophisticated, and it might just be a function of money continuing to flow out as the case count expands, as we might suspect. Like with 20,000 doubling every 5 to 7 days, I don't know if the market has that in its current expectation structure.
I don't think the market has considered that at all, because most people are still pretty happy right now just to buy the dip. And then there's so many people still trolling me every day, thinking me as a fear monger. I think I'm providing a lowball estimate. I tried not to create panic. I just want people to know how to handle a bad situation. But
so, in terms of personal preparations, you've got obviously the burden is on every individual to first of all take care of themselves, but then also not be a transmission vehicle, especially to the older people around you. So in taking on that burden, you have, it sounds like social isolation is what you recommend above the comfortable level, like on the margin, don't go out for dinner, and obviously you favor don't be on airplanes, don't travel around.
right.
Would you go to extremes? Like, would you say don't go to the grocery every week? Like, what is your personal comfort level?
Well, definitely go to your groceries. Just be careful when you go to a grocery store. I wear those single-use gloves when I go into a grocery store, right? So that I don't have to touch the cart, and I can easily throw that glove away when I can't get out, so I don't have to wash my hands, and just little things.
What's your use of masks?
Masks are very helpful in terms of preventing your hands to touch your face. I touch my face maybe 30 times an hour. It just can't help it. With a mask, there will be a barrier between my hand and my face. Gloves helps that too. When you wear a pair of gloves on your hand, you'll be reminded when you move your hand here, you will realize, okay, I have gloves on it. It is not, when I scratch my nose or somewhere, it's weird, right? So it's just any little barrier there helps you to like reducing the frequency of touching your face, cut down the probability of catching this disease. I would say doing things like using a UV light to sanitize your grocery, your mail may be helpful in a couple of months, maybe in 4 weeks to 5 weeks when the spread is more prevalent. Like if we have 10% of people population infected with COVID-19, I definitely will use UV light to disinfect all my mails before I touch it.
Right. Yeah, it's sensible because, okay, what's known about transmission now is that airborne transmission
Droplets.
exists, but it's limited. Is that you have to be in quite close quarters?
That's right. But just by having a conversation, right? When we talk, there's a little bit of droplets just coming out.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to prevent it. And then I can tell you a story how China did this. I have some elderly relatives living in China. When they see a doctor in the past 4 weeks, the doctor asked them to remain a distance of 5 meters, like literally stand at the other side of the room. And then you are only allowed to like talk when the doctor asks you a question, like don't even talk because they're so concerned about the transmission through the droplets, just through talking.
Yeah.
This is for the routine visit they need to get for their cholesterol or diet, like blood sugar meds. This is not for some acute disease. And then doctors just don't want to talk to them. If you just come here for a cholesterol med, like you don't need to talk. You come here for a cholesterol med, they prefer you to write it on a piece of paper and give it to them. And they'll say nothing, you just write you the script and you go away.
Yeah. Now on surfaces, the virus is lasting a long time, right? Or what is
depends on the humidity, temperature. It varies from like 30 minutes, 9 days, depending on temperature, what kind of surface it is. Do you have sunlight exposure? It's complicated. So, but that's a major way to transmit it, like in workplace, door handles to a bathroom, even the faucet in the bathroom could have a lot of viruses on it because of how people use it, how many people have touched it. So these are all the like bathrooms on the airplane, the horrible places for that handle. That door handle is definitely a virus magnet. So surfaces is a big concern, and it's pretty hard to avoid it. I think the best way is still to cut back your outings, your restaurant visits, don't go to movie theaters, don't go out. Wait for a few weeks and see how bad the situation is, and then if it doesn't transmit here, if I was really overestimating everything, then feel free to go out. I don't think it's worthwhile to take the risk right now. There is a third element here, though, the fecal-oral route, because this virus does infect the intestine, and there have been clinical papers showing newborns and babies, they have a high viral load in their poop. So like changing diapers, or like a cook who is not very careful in the hygiene, but if he's sick in the acute phase of COVID-19, could transmit. I have some anecdotal cases in China where people get it from eating takeouts from certain restaurants. Not a lot of cases, but still that's a route that could happen. So if you want to cut down the risk, just be careful with that. And then grandparents should stay away from the grandkids for a couple of weeks, because changing diapers, if the infant were infected, then could be pretty bad for the grandparents.
Yeah. Now, part of the Singapore situation, I really don't know any of the particulars there, but you could imagine that they were paragons of efficiency when it came to treatment. And so the worry in the US is that the case count increases faster than our ability to process, basically,
That's
deal with.
exactly right.
And so that's, according to what I'm gathering, the biggest challenge at the moment. You're not going to be treated properly if you catch it in the next couple of weeks because so many people are going to be catching it at the same time.
Right, and that would be way beyond 10 to 50 times beyond the capacity of what hospital can handle it. And part of it also has to do with how US doctors on the average have been pretty dismissive about this threat of coronavirus. Like I have relatives who are primary care physicians, extremely dismissive of this. Not wearing masks even today, dismissing COVID-19 just like a flu because they haven't caught flu this season without a mask, and they're pretty confident COVID-19 would not do anything to them. So you already have examples in Japan, right? There's one physician who had like COVID-19 and caused like 70 people to be quarantined. I think like 9 or 10 of them were infected. You have this doctor in Victoria, British Columbia this week who had COVID-19 and went down, go to work and infected many, many other patients. We haven't seen those data yet because this is a relatively recent case. I'm just concerned that this kind of situation will happen a lot in the US because doctors are way too relaxed about COVID-19. And I don't blame them. CDC has been telling them the threat has been very low until pretty much a week ago. And then nobody seems to be particularly concerned about COVID-19. So you have doctors who are not wearing protection, getting infected by patients. And then they turn around, they keep working with the infection in their own body and spread it to other patients. And that's kind of the hospital cluster I worry the most at this point. Maybe, I think the situation will change in maybe a week or two, but right now that's the biggest risk. And also, speaking of US system, as far as I know, many hospitals like Kaiser Permanente in Northern California, they're self-insured, meaning they take care of their own doctors. They don't have insurance plans cover their doctor being treated in other hospitals. I don't know how the arrangement is made, but imagine if they have a Wuhan-like situation. If you have, 20, 30% of your doctors and nurses are sick and they fill up your own ICU, who are they gonna, they're gonna run, when they run out of bed, where are their doctors gonna go? What hospital can their doctor go? Sick doctors, if they're not careful, right? So these are the situations that is sort of different from Asia, different from China, different from Singapore. But it seems like a lot of risk managers of the healthcare system are not considering this, which is making me extremely concerned.
And Trump at this point is committed to laying low in his actions and his dialogue. So I don't think that is going to change. At a certain point in China, it's fair to say that they were acting aggressively, but they were also probably underreporting a good bit. And then she at some point made public announcements that it was a serious threat. So there was a change in tone. The actions were always aggressive. The numbers were underreported. In the US, the numbers are underreported because they're not testing.
Right.
And Trump has basically doubled down and committed to a strategy of downplaying. And that's just where we are.
That's right. I think in China before January 18th, they were doing what we're doing right now. Between January 18th through like last week, the numbers they're reporting are pretty accurate. I believe it's close to their technical capability. The reason for that is the incentive, the financial incentive was set in such a way that province and hospitals need to get reimbursement from the central government for their COVID-19 treatment and diagnostics, right? So how much reimbursement they're gonna get, how much resource they're gonna get, depends on how many cases they report. There's no incentive for them to underreport at that point. And there was an understanding that the cost coverage from the central government will be cut from 100% to 50% in the next couple of weeks. So there's a lot of incentive for them to be really diligent and get all the cases out now to get the money. And also they saw what happened to the Hubei, party chief, their Wuhan mayor, the party chief there, they all got sacked. They lost their job, I think on February 3rd or something, basically within 2 weeks of that outbreak. That's a good example for other provinces, other cities. Like, don't hide the numbers now. People need to, if you're flying blind, you're definitely gonna crash your airplane, right? So that was the incentive for them to report the numbers, I think, to their technical ability, the testing ability. In the past weeks, I do see a lot of slacking in local governments, and there are, borderline cases, sort of, they call it asymptomatic cases that are just locally, the statistics is not reported to the central government, and it's not reported in the case numbers. But Italy and France are doing that too, for different technical reasons. I think they are running out of hospital beds and testing capabilities. The problem here in the US right now is where, as you said, in the actual mitigations, public health actions, they were buying the same talking points from the propaganda part of the government. They really truly believe that this outbreak is not going to be a big issue, and they're not putting all the efforts they have. For example, to reduce air traffic, to protect the hospitals, to inform the doctor the possible treatment plans. Like, so many primary care physicians are still unprepared. That's just amazing. I do understand the need for a little propaganda to make people look at the positive side, because, for example, in early February, like in China, it was so depressive to just hear people dying, hundreds of people dying every single day. Like, literally, when your ICU units have only 20% survival rate, you literally see parents, people of our age, in their 40s, the parents get checked into the hospital, because this is a contagious disease. You're not allowed to visit them, and they go very quickly from regular bed hospital ward to the ICU ward. You still cannot visit them, and then they just die, and then was sent to cremation, because this is infectious disease, very contagious, and they don't allow you to do a funeral. Nobody would be able to say goodbye, visit the body, and all that. And it's just so depressing to have that, hundreds of people dying every single day. Doctors are dying. So it's probably necessary at that point to say, okay, focus on the positive, 80% people are recovering, it's not that bad, just to prevent everybody to go completely depressed. But I don't think we're at that stage yet, so I don't really understand. Besides, our government want to make the stock market looks really good, and then if you don't have a lot of cases, then at least in February, the stock market respond that way. But frankly, at this point, I think the stock market will respond better if you put all your energy into disease control as opposed to, information control or narrative control.
Yeah, absolutely. And just listening to you, I'm not going to go on any skateboarding trips with my son anytime in the next few weeks. I don't think it would be a good time to visit the hospital with a broken arm. That would
be really
tough timing to visit the hospital for any reason.
Right.
Random question. With regard to all the events that we throw in the U.S., it clearly is an events capital of the world. We have more large sporting events, and it's obvious that these are very high risk. I've heard that you have an interesting interplay there, where on the one hand, insurance generally does not cover these things for sports owners. It's just not part of the package. So anytime an event is canceled, there is always a big financial hit for the organizer. But I've been wondering about the legal liability situation. Have you heard anything? I would imagine it's just totally uncharted territory in terms of torts, like the liability that you have for organizing a big event. I'll be interested to see how that plays out, because that might it might be a big legal issue in the U.S.
Yes, I totally agree. And just looking at the clusters happening in South Korea and Singapore, big events kind of seed a lot of the. Also in Boston, right? We just had this Biogen conference that infected like 66 people.
Yeah, and what could you do at a basketball game where you had a couple people? It is terrifying. So I have limited time based on our scheduling. So I want to hit a couple of quick topics before we end. I want to hit the in game. Explain to me what it looks like when a Gilead or a Roche or some startup that no one has heard of yet comes up with the antibodies that they can inject in people, and we start really sort of solving it. What does it look like? And then in terms of just the so that's the good scenario, and then the bad scenario is like, what does it become a permanent function of our environment where it's mutating and we're like a flu but worse? See if we can hit those two things quickly.
Right, that's a good question. So first of all, remdesivir, that's the magic pill from Gilead, right? It's actually not a pill, it's an IV infusion. So in the best case scenario, if they are able to ramp up the production and supply that med for 10% of the population in the US, how are we going to find out the nurses to give you IV infusion? It requires IV infusion over 30 minutes to an hour, and it's a 5-day to 10-day course. How many people can get that kind of treatment? I don't think we have the capacity to deliver it that way. It's not an injection. It has to be IV infusion. I'm not even talking about cost and production here. So remdesivir, okay, that's an insurance policy for the White House, okay, for the Congress. People there, powerful people get sick, they will have access to those. For you and me, I'm not very hopeful from getting remdesivir at this point. In the next 6 months, I would say.
But in a year, it could become a standard thing that everyone was doing. And
well, if we have unimpeded transmission, and if summer doesn't really slow down it much, by November we'll all have it. We don't need to wait for a year. This thing is so contagious. It's going to be just everywhere. It's going to be too late even for vaccine.
It just comes down to your genetics and your state of health at the moment. Can you fade it or not?
Right. Well, there is a med that China and also France, part of China has been using. Chloroquine is an anti-malaria med. It's very cheap. It's oral pill. It partially blocks the entry of coronavirus into human cells, and believed to be 80% blocking the shedding of virus from an infected cell. So there's some clinical data from China. They haven't published it yet. It looks pretty encouraging. And but this med is very toxic. So how to use it, when to use it, how much you use it, depending on how good your heart is, what kind of other meds you're using. It's doable. It just requires a lot of skill from a doctor, from a pharmacist. I'm not optimistic in the sense that if our medical system, if our healthcare system collapses, we don't have people to help an average person to navigate through this. But that med is there. And I think, surprisingly, a country like Dominican Republic or Brazil or some African country, because they have malaria, lots of people have chloroquine, they might even suffer less in terms of overall mortality rate when the dust settles in a year and a half or in 2 years. Their population is younger and they have the meds, and it's everywhere. People are already taking it for malaria. So that's one thing. Regarding antibodies and vaccines, I'm not really optimistic on those. So a typical vaccine, you need 3 months of safety trial, and you need another 6 months of efficacy trial. Without those trials, a untested vaccine can be as bad as COVID-19. Vaccine itself can trigger those cytokine storms and causing respiratory failure. And you really, really have to be very careful testing it in a large group, hundreds of people or even thousands of people to figure out the safety of the vaccine before mass produce it and give it to the entire population. So that all takes time. And given how quickly COVID-19 has been doubling, I don't, like, unless we pull off a China, you lock down people and limit their mobility for 6 months, what else can you do to wait out the disease? I think China probably is trying to do that. They keep the infection rate really, really low and then vaccinate everybody in November, in December when the vaccine is available, and then they lift the lockdown. So what I'm hearing, a lot of the sort of noise or the priority in China right now is to ramp up their face mask production capability or capacity to about 300 million a day, so that all the businesses, small business, large business, everybody can wear masks, can wear gloves, and then go to work. That's their stopgap measure for now before they have the vaccine. And they seem to be willing to wait out the disease to do the vaccine, and they're just gonna do travel restriction. We don't do travel restriction. We don't close schools here. We keep the doubling rate as is, then it's really, like, by the vaccines available, it's already everywhere. But as long as you eat a lot and rest enough, this shouldn't be a killer for most people below 60.
Now, viruses are trying to propagate their genes just as every other organism is. Now, when the host doesn't have immunity, there's no need to mutate, right? And then later, if there's always possibilities that you get small mutations in the same way that other diseases do after it becomes harder to spread. This would be a process that I'm naive on because as a non-scientist, but how does it work when there's slight changes of form in the virus?
So given the data we have seen so far in the past 6 weeks, the mutation rate is about 1 base pair per 2 transmission. So when the virus jumps into the third person from the first patient, you can expect 1 base pair mutation in the virus. Right now, because we haven't widely used medicine, chloroquine or remdesivir in the population, there is no selection pressure to select a particular type of virus. This mutation is just random. It happens in random places. It happens into a random type. So it's just exponential growth of all kinds of different, different COVID-19. And at this point, the mutation is not significant enough to be, we haven't seen enough evidence to say it's going to make the disease worse or lighter and all that. For other diseases like Ebola or the Spanish flu, there is a selection pressure to keep people alive. So super virulent virus, like if a virus kills the host within 3 days or within 7 days, that virus cannot propagate very far because the host is already dead before he or she can give it to others, right? So viruses do have a selection pressure to keep the host to live long enough and to propagate. At this point, COVID-19 can keep people alive for 3 weeks, even for people who has gone through the severe case and going to ICU and dead. That's still a 3-week process. That's long enough for it to infect tens of people, even hundreds of people. So I don't see any selection pressure to make COVID-19 weaker in terms of virulence. It seems like it is what it is, and it's just continue to grow.
So I'll take exactly five more minutes for a subject that we could, I'm sure, chat about for an hour, but we'll only take 5 minutes. Um, it seems insane to chat about like economics and financial markets, having chatted about this important topic, but um, with regard to the markets, which have been a frequent subject of conversation, given the high volatility, it seems that we're at a point where a very weak underlying reality is coming against a low expectations, but probably not low enough expectations, and at the same time, there's some unknown massive policy response that's likely coming. I'm I'm curious, what do you think the policy response looks like? This is what is keeping the market guessing at the moment, and as we know, there's not so much you can do in the face of something that's affecting supply so severely. But nonetheless, things will be tried. So, what do you think will be tried?
I think what the US and Europe and Japan has been good at, as we all know, is to do rate cuts, right? That's like they can do that in the middle of the night. And they already did that. I think the Fed fund rate will probably go to zero by the next FOMC meeting, which is next Wednesday. If not, then it will go to zero in April. It's going to go to zero very quickly. I think the current not QE or POMO, the T-bill buying program will continue, $60 billion a month. And they may transition into buying 2-year or 3-year T-notes because we're running out of T-bills. So monetary side is pretty easy to predict because they always do. Fiscal side, there's something I hope is going to happen, which is putting money into disease prevention right now, shoring up the hospitals, shoring up the the logistics. We can't afford to have the freight service between food producing states and food consuming states. We cannot afford to have that broken, right? But freight service, the truck drivers will get sick, and we need to protect those people. Grocery stores, like people need to be able to get food. That's what I would focus on. But I don't think it's going to. That's the priority of our current government. What I think will happen, given what they have behaved so far, is since Trump has a lot of hotels, I think the hotels, airlines will be bailed out very soon, just because he has a lot of hotels. Cruise lines maybe, but cruise lines is really it's sort of not an essential business in general. Banks will big banks will be bailed out. Small banks are being killed by the flat yield curve, or if the yield goes negative, it's going to be very, very devastating for small banks. Don't think there will be anything done to that. The payroll tax deduction or reduction they talked about, I think it's not going to be helpful because it's going to be spread out over 6 or 7 months, and it's going to mostly impact people with, upper middle class with higher income who make a lot of money. If some guy who's driving Uber is making only $30K a year, like payroll tax deduction is not going to give that person a lot of more free cash to stay at home for 4 weeks to get a complete rest from COVID-19, right? So I do expect a huge demand crash or a loss of demand shock in the US because of the fiscal response will focus on the industries that's close to the power, not necessarily close to the people who spend the money. Let's just say, if even cold-heartedly, you say, where's your consumers? Where's your customers? Who can keep the cash flow going for all the big businesses? Then I don't think the government is. I don't think the current government is focusing on that at all. They're focusing on travel. They're focusing on cruise lines, banks.
Yeah. Now the history over the past 12 years has been that monetary policy has been much more aggressive than fiscal policy, in part because you don't have as much of a process there. It's fewer individuals that control things, and so I would argue that we're probably quite close to some dramatic actions like buying corporate bonds in the U.S. and
yeah, at this moment, they can buy commercial papers, which is very short-term corporate bonds, like 6 months. They are not authorized to buy longer term, like a year or 2-year maturity corporate bonds. They need Congress authorization to do that. There's some alphabet facility from the Treasury can be utilized as a bridge to do that. But
well, when I say buy, they do, I would think, have the ability to have a lending facility which would effectively operate as the same way of buying. Is that true?
That part is pretty difficult. They can holding that lending facility for 6 months commercial paper.
Corporate bonds to cash in an exchange that's not possible.
Basically, using corporate bond as collateral to borrow cash from Fed at this point is legally it's not possible. Congress has to authorize it. This is changed by the Dodd-Frank. It was possible in 2008, not possible now.
And theoretically, and I wouldn't think that this will happen even under the most dramatic circumstances, but theoretically, the Treasury can buy stocks. It's never been done, but theoretically that's possible, correct?
They have limited ammo to do that. They cannot spend their entire TGA to do that.
Right, but theoretically, that is possible.
It's a gray area. I mean, Congress can give them a very hard time, can sue the Treasury Secretary. In 2008 they can do that. Right now it's very difficult. And also, I don't think that solved the problem. I don't think this is a liquidity crisis. I think the problem is, let's just take an S&P 500 company. Let's say if Amazon loses 5% of its workforce from COVID-19, that's not going to be solved by giving more loans to Amazon. If Amazon loses 6% of its customer, that's not going to be solved by giving more loans. Loans is for liquidity crisis. This is solvency crisis. The cash flow can be permanently impacted if we don't deal with this infectious disease. So I think that from a cash flow perspective, yeah, we should definitely have 2-3 months of bridge loans to help those companies to not default just because of this sudden event. That's totally very reasonable, and we should definitely do that. But right now, it seems like that's the only response we're getting from the government. Like the only aggressive response is on the monetary side. And it's like stimulating and then causing more asset price inflation. Oh, by the way, one thing I don't tweet a lot on Twitter that is happening in China right now is there's not only asset price inflation, there's a lot of consumer product inflation. The cost of buying food, I think, went up by like 20 to 25% because everybody has to order it online. And it has to be delivered, and there will be delivery fee. There's all kinds of fee added into it. So there will be a lot of food inflation. There will be a lot of extra costs for people just to eat. And so inflation can go up quite a bit in the next couple of months.
Yeah, and that's just if demand stays somewhat constant and supply curves shift to the left as they're no doubt doing right now. You get prices going up, and that's sort of what the stagflation environment looks like. Like in the 70s when we had the oil price shocks, you had demand curves relatively unchanged and supply curves shifting quite a lot, and as a result you had declining quantities and declining prices, which are the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Declining quantities and increasing prices.
Exactly. So the point that I try to make is the political capital for doing unconstrained monetary stimulus will be very little in 6 months to 9 months. Because once the inflation picks up, once the people start to not having income, but then the cost of living goes up because of the lockdowns and all that, to justify doing more QE as the only solution or the main solution will be hard.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know if they can do this forever or just like.
Yeah, but the reason that it will be tried is because it's clear that we've organized our politics in such a way where these are primary concerns. They shouldn't be primary concerns, but the state of the markets are primary concerns. And then also there is so much that can't break or that is perceived to be unbreakable, like boomer retirement accounts, pension funds, insurance reserves. Like there are things that break when asset prices go down, and the perception in terms of public policy, people at the Fed and people in government, is that these things can't break, so they'll try to do everything to prevent them from breaking.
Right.
So that's why I believe the policy response will be dramatic, even if the typical person would not support it and should not support it.
I completely agree, and it will backfire, but they will do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks so much. I love this time as always, and I'm deeply appreciative.
Well, it's always fun to chat with you. This is hopefully, I hope many people will benefit from this.
Excellent. I will see you soon.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.